My name is Obichukwu Nwazota, and you're welcome to the Ethics and Values in the Boardroom series, brought to you by UGN Consulting Services. In our previous episode, we discussed the effective board member, focusing on the individual board member and his or her effectiveness. So today, we'll be discussing the effective board, the board as a collective, the effective board. And UGN Consulting Services is a tax, accounting, and management consulting firm. From our practice and from what we see happening globally, we've seen a lot, we have had news about a lot of corporate failures, corporate scandals, and corporate misconduct. And these always have a very great impact on the public interest, on economies, even on a global scale. So, and this always points to the fact, points fingers to the board. What were the board doing? And we know that board of directors are very critical to good corporate governance. But when what we see in practice, most times we see it's regulated. Corporate governance is majorly and most often in most jurisdictions regulated. It is legally required, but still the effects that's supposed to bring to business, to corporate conduct, to corporate performance, sometimes always falls short. So that's what's informing this webinar, the effective board member. How can we be more effective in providing good corporate governance for our organizations? And not only, and we know that corporate governance it applies to both public sector, private sectors, SMEs, it's just everywhere. It's something we see every day. So today, our agenda for today, we'll introduce the topic just to create background. We'll talk briefly on the board and what the board is. We'll look at the key board responsibilities. Then we'll go into the meat of the day, which is the panel discussion session. And then I will introduce our very distinguished guests, Mr. Adebayo and Mr. Ewelukwa. So I'll open with the introduction. Remember to drop your questions as we progress. You can use the chat to drop your questions and your comments. So what is the board? When we hear about the board, who are the board? The board is a group of people elected by shareholders as a fiduciary to jointly provide corporate governance for their organization. So we see the key words there: fiduciary, jointly, and corporate governance. So the board of directors are fiduciary. That's a person or a group that has a legal and ethical obligation to act in the best interest of another. That is a fiduciary. And the board, anyone that is a member of the board, whether you're a non-executive or an executive or independent member, you have this fiduciary duty, which entails 3 key duties. Duty of loyalty. You should be loyal to the company. You should be loyal to the shareholders that you're representing. Duty of loyalty, the duty to act in good faith. That means the duty to act with sincerity of purpose, to act with fairness. And then the duty of care. These are the duties. And these are the duties of a board of directors as a collective. So you have to act with duty of care. It speaks about not being negligent in your duty. So remember, we're just creating a background to our discussions today. So the main discussion will start with the panel discussion. So I'm not going to dwell on this. So now we've talked, the board is a fiduciary, and the main purpose of the board is to provide corporate governance. And we all know the definition of corporate governance, the system by which companies are directed and controlled. So the purpose of the board is to provide direction and control. That is corporate governance, direction and control. And when we talk about corporate governance, we're talking about high level direction, high level control. That is the purpose of the board. Then we go to that's what we just spoke about now. Corporate governance is equals to strategic direction, strategic control. Then, what are the key responsibilities of the board? We've seen who the board is. The board is a fiduciary collectively, individually and collectively. The board is a fiduciary. They are acting in they are acting in the best interest of the shareholders and of the company. Then we see the purpose of the board. The purpose of the board is to provide corporate governance, which is strategic direction and strategic control. Then from this, we can draw the key responsibilities of the board. And our discussions today are based on best practices, because corporate governance is every jurisdiction has their different laws guiding their corporate governance. But when you look at all these laws, you see they always have something in common. Something in common. So what we are discussing today, we won't go to the details of saying, oh, in this jurisdiction, this is this, this is that. But we know the standard expectation, the standard responsibilities that is expected of boards. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So we're going to be looking at the key responsibilities. So the key responsibilities of the board can be just summarized in this picture here. We have the duty of strategic representation. Strategic representation. And what I call strategic representation means that the board represents the company and especially the shareholders' strategic representation at a high level. The board also provides strategic direction. That's the purpose. So it must be part of your responsibilities. Strategic direction, strategic control. Strategic control. And when you look at these three things, in the middle of it is strategic decision making. That is the key thing that any board does, making decisions. Like someone said, the key responsibilities of the board is to make the hard calls, take decision on the hard calls of the company. So strategic decision making is the heart of the responsibility of any board. If the board are not able to make strategic decisions, then that's as in there's no board. But that's the heart. Everything you do when you're strategic, when you're giving strategic direction, when you're giving strategic direction, when you're giving strategic control, when you're doing and when you're doing strategic representation decisions, you're taking key and long-term high impact decisions. So we're going to break it down a little so we see how these key responsibilities play out. So we're going to give a little more detail on the key responsibilities. So number one key responsibility in no order is to determine and oversee corporate strategy. Determine and oversee corporate strategy. And most literature usually says set corporate strategy. But I believe that the board actually determines. Most times, what we see in practice, the executives will present the strategy. It's the board that will now take decisions. So the board actually determines what the corporate strategy is and then oversees that. And looking at it, you've already seen strategic direction, strategic control. Oversight is strategic control. Determine is direction. You're giving a direction on corporate strategy. And when you're giving direction on corporate strategy, at the same time, you have to oversee and ensure that the strategy is implemented. And when we're talking about corporate strategy, it's important that we understand that any corporate strategy that is being done or developed for an organization, it must be able to deliver competitive advantage to that organization. Competitive advantage, not in the short run, but in the long term. So that is a key responsibility to determine and oversee corporate strategy. Corporate strategy. Okay, let's just go back to that slide. Corporate strategy. The corporate objectives. This is what should be covered in your corporate strategy. the market standing, the board has to decide on that. What direction? Where do we want to stand? How do we want to be seen in the market? How do we want the customers to see us? How do we want the public to see us? How do we want our competitors to see us? Financing. The board has to determine the financing strategy. And all these things are in the long term. Is it equity or debt? The board take that decision. Productivity. How are we going to compete? How are we going to compete? Whether using technology, our employees, the kind of employees we have, embracing IT and all that. Profitability. You have to make decisions on that, oversee, also put in controls on how to make sure that what you want is what you're getting. So the thing that you must have at the back of your mind is to create a competitive advantage that will make for long-term success. Then number 2, risk management. This is very key. This is a very key remit of the board, to manage risk at a high level. That's where you set the risk appetite, the risk culture of the company. And when we remember what happened in the Silicon Valley Bank that collapsed in 2023, one of the things that were held against the board, or people were talking about, is that the bank did not have a chief risk officer for many months. That position was vacant. So the board can be held accountable on that. And what brought their downfall is also a risk that they failed to mitigate. So the board plays a very crucial role in risk management. Then we talk about financial risks, IT and data risks, financial reporting risks, sustainability risks. This is now a very important role that every board of directors must embrace: sustainability risks and geopolitical risks. This geopolitical risks is now a key thing again that boards should now anticipate. It has to make part of your executive sessions. Risk management, geopolitical risks, given what we are seeing now, the trade wars and political changes we are seeing, dynamics we are seeing all over the world. Then number 3, the board, the key responsibility of the board include ethical leadership. And that involves making decisions based on the right thing to do for the common good, not just based on what is best for themselves. That's for the board of directors or for the bottom line. So that is ethical leadership, setting the tone. And this definition, making decisions based on the right thing, is gotten from Harvard's Division of Continuing Education. That is what they define as ethical leadership. So that is a key responsibility of the board. They have to set the ethical tone. You have to show and drive responsible corporate citizenship. Make sure that the company is embracing that. Sustainability also speaks of your ethical leadership. Code of ethics. You have to set frameworks that promote ethics in the organization and also in the board. So what you do has far greater impact than what you say. So ethical leadership also talks about leading by examples, creating ethical cultures that is seen from the board down, from the top to the down. Then number 4, overseeing management. Many people rate this as the most important duty, responsibility of the board. Yes, it's a very key responsibility, overseeing management. And when we talk about overseeing management, we look at monitoring performance. How is the executive management performing? Are they delivering the results that is good for our shareholders and our stakeholders? Compensation, how the boards are, how the executives are compensated. And succession planning, that is very important, because the boards are the ones that appoint the executives, the management. So this is a key and very important role of the board. If you're not able to get the right man for the job, then it means that things might fall apart, because as a board, you are not there to monitor the day-to-day. You just come like maybe 6 or 4 times in a year. So overseeing management is a very key responsibility. And like Theodore Roosevelt said, the former president, the best executive is the one who has sense enough to pick good men to do what he wants done. So you can say the good board is the one that has good sense to pick good people that will do what has to be done, and has self-restraint to keep from meddling with them while they do so. Because most times you see that boards, it seems as if the boards are meddling sometimes. And at the same time, sometimes they just pick the person and they don't care to oversee. So overseeing management is another key role of the board. And finally, number 5, to act in the best interest of the company and its shareholders. That's when we are speaking of strategic representation. That is another key responsibility. Act in the best interest of the company and its shareholders. And when we're talking about shareholders, now it extends to also the stakeholders. Because if you ignore your stakeholders, in the long term, it's going to come back to bite you and bite your shareholders that you represent. So acting in the best interest of the company, which is also falls back to what we talked about, fiduciary duties. So that is your key responsibility. For you to act in the best interest, you have to demonstrate that duty of care, that duty of loyalty, and that duty of acting in good faith. So that is the key, that is the 5th key responsibility. And just to some of the things that fall into acting in the interest of the company and the shareholders is board nomination and election, because the shareholders appoint the board of directors. Subsequently, the board nominates and elects new board members, which must be approved by the shareholders. Then also manage potential conflict of interest, which is bound to arise, because the board of directors is now handling like 3 interests. They have 3 interests at hand. They have the interest of the company, the interest of the shareholders, interest of themselves. Because if you're not careful, some self-interest may crop up. So we have to manage potential conflict of interest. Don't allow them to crystallize. Let them just be, there's potential conflict of interest, but the board has a duty to manage it. That is acting in the best interest of the company and the shareholders. Then shareholders' rights, protect shareholders' rights and promote shareholders and stakeholders' interests. So, like I said, this is to provide a background to our topic, to our discussion on the effective board. For you to be effective, you have to first of all understand what you're meant to do. So we go into the effective board.